So straight away, I completely get that saying, hey, are we going to get a Kirk-focused Star Trek show that's a sequel to Strange New Worlds is pretty much just saying, hey, are we getting a remake of the original series? Because if we do someday get a follow-up show to Strange New Worlds that focuses on Paul Wesley's Kirk, then yeah, that's pretty much just the original show, but it's updated for today. But Paul Wesley just recently won a Saturn Award for his role as James T. Kirk in Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2, and TrekMovie.com interviewed him both before and after this win, where they asked him how he'd feel about potentially taking over as the lead of a Star Trek show that was focused on Kirk and that would follow up Strange New Worlds. Paul's response was just kind of that if that had ever happened, he'd be all on board for it, but that for the moment he's fine just seeing what happens with Strange New Worlds. Now, personally, my read on Strange New Worlds' plan for the next few years is that they're slowly phasing out the old cast and bringing in the original series cast as the show goes on. Because Season 1 of Strange New Worlds is set in 2259, Season 2 is set in 2260, and then Star Trek the original series starts in 2265. So Spock was established during Discovery Season 2, Uhura was brought in at the beginning of Season 1, we met Kirk at the very end of Season 1, and then, spoiler alert, Scotty showed up at the end of Season 2. So going off of that formula, I think it's very likely that every year or every season final, we're going to meet a new member of the original crew, and that person then will be a much bigger character the following season, because after Kirk showing up in the very final episode of Season 1, he ended up being in 3 episodes of Season 2, and he's probably going to be in maybe like 5 in Season 3, so they're slowly building up characters the more as we go on. Now, Strange New Worlds is also a very traditional Star Trek show, because yeah, it's only 10 episodes a season, but I feel like out of everything we've gotten since 2017, Star Trek Strange New Worlds has the most 90s Trek feel about it, and 90s Trek is my favourite Star Trek era. I think that that's peak Star Trek. I think the shows that came out then are pretty much what the franchise should be. And Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager all ran for 7 seasons each, and they were the 90s Trek shows. So I think a very possible plan that the show currently has is that they want to run for 7 seasons to match this, because if we're going at 1 season equals a year, which is what the show has been doing so far, 2 seasons, we've gone 2 years. So if they do that and they go for 5 more seasons, it pretty much brings them to the very beginning of the original series. This would honestly be really interesting because it would mean that the main cast of like Season 5 or Season 6 is a completely new cast almost from what we had in Season 1. It would give the show a real, maybe transitional feel, because now Pike's my favourite thing about the show. I think he's fantastic, and I think Anson is fantastic, but going off of this, that would probably mean that Pike would have to leave the show unless they wanted to not focus as much on the Enterprise, and maybe they followed Pike all the way up to his accident in 2266. This could mean that maybe the later stages of Stranger Worlds actually overlap with the first season of the original series. There is a bit of weirdness surrounding when Pike leaves the Enterprise though, because StarTrek.com for a long time listed his captaincy on the Enterprise as ending in 2262, with Kirk becoming captain then, but this would be a bit wild because this would mean that by the end of Season 4 we could already be seeing the show become the Kirk show and seeing Pike leave the Enterprise. But then in Star Trek Voyager in Season 7 we'd each say that Kirk's first 5-year mission ended in 2270, which would mean it started pretty much when the original series starts in 2265, which could indicate that this is exactly when Kirk took command, but it also could just be that Kirk and the Enterprise were on smaller missions for a few years before starting their 5-year mission. It is kind of fun to theorize what all of this could mean. Like, does this mean that Strange New Worlds hypothetically ends with Season 4, we fully transition to the original series crew with that final, then we get Season 1 of a new show that is reminiscent of the original, but it's still 3 years until that starts, so we could get this cool kind of 3-year show that is a prequel to Kirk's 5-year mission and a prequel to the original series, but still a sequel to Strange New Worlds. And this could leave room for like Pike to show up every now and then. Some other Strange New Worlds cast members may be making some appearances. It would let the show have its own flavour as well. Or, the other thing we could see is that Pike does leave in Season 4 and the show just has Kirk as the lead, which I think is probably a little more likely because with how the dates line up for exactly 7 seasons, it feels to me like this was always maybe a planned thing. I think if this is the case, we wouldn't get a direct sequel to Strange New Worlds with Kirk because that would feel like it's literally a reboot or remake of the original seasons since they'd be happening at the same time. It's not impossible, though, that there's a time jump at the end of Strange New Worlds, because Kirk's 5-year mission ends in 2270, the first 3 seasons of the original series cover 4 of those years, and then the 2 seasons of the animated series cover the back half of the 4th year, and all of the 5th year. Now, animated series canon is usually kind of disputed, depends on who you ask. Lower Decks makes so many references to it that I kind of just count it as canon a little bit. But personally, I would say we probably won't see anything from Kirk's first 5-year mission because in some way, shape or form that's all been covered unless they want to do like a really cool recreation of something. Like we see the Menagerie recreated the 2-part episode from the original series that focused on Pike's accident and the aftermath of that. It will be kind of cool to to revisit that in some shape or form and see it from a different point of view, maybe from the point of view of Strange New Worlds characters. Now, the first film, Star Trek The Motion Picture, takes place the following year in 2271, but then there's 14 years of nothing until Wrath of Khan takes place. Only place we've seen this time period covered is in non-canon books and non-canon games. That's it. What we do know is that despite being an admiral, Kirk became captain again of the Enterprise and took it on another 5-year mission straight after Motion Picture, and then he did briefly retire for a little bit before Wrath of Khan, but that's it. That's all we know. There is a lot of room there to do some cool stuff. Now, I personally think a really cool idea would be a time jump and then do a show set during this era, because the uniforms are completely different, the Enterprise has a completely different look, a lot of new characters can be brought in, you can use the Romulans and Klingons a lot more, and a ton of other species a lot more regularly than Strange New Worlds can, because you wouldn't be breaking canon, because a lot of these species don't really start being big players in this area of the quadrant until the original series takes place. Also, it just would mean that this show would be completely different in a lot of ways to Strange New Worlds. It wouldn't just feel like a sequel to Strange New Worlds or a follow-up. It really does give them room to make a lot of the characters different, to do a lot of new and interesting things that really sort of separate this show from what Strange New Worlds was. Like, this whole era really does give room for the show to feel like it has a visual change enough for it to deserve to be its own show. I would love this, honestly, because I think this is something New Trek should now kind of move to after we've had a couple years of exploring the old period and stuff like that. We should probably be expanding beyond the original 2260s era of Trek, because I feel like so much stuff in general has just been set there, whereas the first 6 movies and then the next 50 years after the first 6 movies haven't really been explored, or not a lot done nearly as much. That 50-year stretch after Undiscovered Country and before The Next Generation is actually called the Lost Era in lore because of how little it has been seen or used. Like, even in the books, games, and comics, barely anything has been done with it. Through all of this, though, I do think we need to see Pike. I think we need to see his accident happen, and we don't know for sure what happens to him after the menagerie when he goes back to Talos. Like, does he stay there his whole life, or at some point is he able to leave because of something? I think we should follow up on that, though, when we get to that point, in whether this is a show or a movie or just more seasons of Stranger Worlds. But what about you? Do you want to see a Kirk-focused show? Do you just want Stranger Worlds to keep going forever? What year or era of Star Trek do you want this stuff to be set in? Or what year or era of Star Trek do you want to explore that hasn't really been seen yet? Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and all of that. I hope you have an amazing day.